The town of Ridgeway has long been blanketed in an eerie silence when it comes to the children who vanish within the dense and twisted woods that border its edge. The forest has always been a place of whispers and shadows, but for generations, parents have shared quiet warnings behind closed doors, cautionary tales of a presence within those trees, something ancient and unknowable. They speak of how it lures children, not with force, but with something far more dangerous, a voice that only the young can hear. It's not just any voice either. Children describe it as soft and familiar, sometimes sounding like a friend, a parent, or a song they once loved. And once they hear it, it becomes nearly impossible to resist. The pattern is always the same. A child disappears. It begins with restlessness, the kind that keeps them awake at night, or draws their gaze out the window long after bedtime. Then, they begin to wander closer and closer to the tree line, claiming they heard something or saw someone waving from the woods. No one knows how it chooses its victims. There is no consistent age, no gender preference, no specific family background. The only common thread is that once a child steps beyond the first row of trees, they're never seen again. The town has tried everything: fences, curfews, patrols, but nothing works. The disappearances happen too quietly, too suddenly. Search parties are organized almost immediately after a child is reported missing. Volunteers line up with flashlights and dogs, combing the thick underbrush, calling out names that are swallowed up by the forest's unnatural silence. They never find anything. No shoe prints, no scraps of clothing, no signs of a struggle. It's as though the forest simply absorbs them, erasing their existence completely. Some locals insist the woods are alive, not metaphorically, but literally. They say the trees watch. They claim the wind that blows through the branches is not just rustling leaves, but the murmurs of something sentient. There are stories about trees that shift when no one is looking, of trails that change direction, of compasses spinning wildly the deeper one goes. Some even believe the forest chooses when to allow people in and when to keep them out. One of the more chilling aspects of the disappearances is the strange behavior that precedes them. Parents recall moments of sudden change in their children's moods, that swing from joy to rage without cause, or an intense focus on the woods as if under a spell. Some children start drawing pictures of the forest, or of a tall, faceless figure with long arms standing between the trees. One mother remembered her son sleep-talking night after night, muttering about someone waiting at the tree with the bent branches. Others have mentioned dreams of a forest where the trees breathe, where the sky is always red, and where someone with no eyes watches from the shadows. What's most unsettling is that the town doesn't talk about it publicly. There are no town hall meetings about the missing, no memorials. It's almost as if Ridgeway has made an unspoken pact to forget, to pretend it's just bad luck, or that the children ran away. But the grief is there, hidden beneath tight smiles and drawn faces. The school has empty desks that no one moves. The playground has a swing that squeaks even when there's no wind. And every year, more families move away, unable to bear the constant fear that their child could be next. Despite all of this, the forest still holds a strange pull. Even adults have admitted, in hushed tones, to feeling the urge to walk toward it at times, to just see what's inside. Most fight the feeling and move on. But children, with their boundless curiosity and open hearts, are easier prey. Some believe the forest uses that innocence, twists it into something it can use to lure them in. There have even been rumors of children calling out from the woods days after their disappearance. their voices weak but unmistakably for the calls to vanish when anyone approaches. The authorities have nothing to offer but platitudes. They blame wild animals, unstable terrain, even the weather. They urge people to stay out of the forest, post signs, and tell the press they're investigating every lead. But no evidence ever surfaces. The woods give nothing back, not a hair, not a drop of blood. It's as if the moment the children cross some invisible threshold, they're no longer part of our world, and so Ridgeway waits. Each day is lived under a quiet cloud of dread, with every parent casting nervous glances toward the tree line. Children are watched more closely than ever, but it never seems to be enough. Because when the woods want one, they always find a way. The whispers will return. The wind will carry that familiar voice. And another child will walk toward the forest, drawn by a presence no one else can hear. Then they will vanish, and Ridgeway will remain silent once more. The stories began with whispers from the older folks, tales of children who once walked into the forest beyond Ridgeway and were never seen again. But what gave these old legends terrifying weight were the strange sightings reported over the years. It started subtly, glimpse of a small figure standing just beyond the tree line at dusk, motionless, watching. Parents, hikers, and even teenagers out for late-night mischief claimed to see what they thought were the missing children, but something about them was always off, too still, too pale, and always gone the moment anyone tried to approach. One woman swore she saw her own daughter, who had disappeared 3 years earlier, standing barefoot on a log deep in the woods. She was wearing the same pink jacket she'd vanished in, but her eyes were hollow, her face twisted in a frozen expression that looked more like sadness than fear. When the mother screamed her name and ran toward her, the girl silently stepped backwards into the trees and vanished, leaving no footprints, no trace. The woman had claw marks down her arms when she returned, not from branches, but from hands, small hands that grabbed at her as she ran. As sightings grew more frequent, the town began to whisper that the children were not truly gone, at least not in the way they had assumed. Some began to believe that the forest didn't consume them, but changed them, transformed them into something else. Witnesses described children who looked like ghosts' faces, pale and stretched, clothes tattered, eyes entirely black or missing. Altogether, they stood in unnatural positions, like broken dolls propped up in the underbrush, never blinking, never speaking. There was a hunter named Wallace who claimed he saw 5 of them at once while tracking deer. He described them as standing in a circle around something I couldn't see, chanting in a language that didn't sound human. He said one of them turned to look at him, and its face flickered like static on an old TV. He ran, dropped his rifle, and never hunted again. Wallace left Ridgeway 2 days later and hasn't returned since. What frightened people most wasn't just the sightings themselves, it was the slow realization that these figures seemed aware of those watching them. They weren't echoes or hallucinations. They were purposeful. Sometimes they would mimic voices. A mother hearing her lost son call out, "Mummy," from the edge of the trees. A boy hearing his sister giggling just beyond a bend in the path. But when they followed the sound, there was nothing, just silence and the overwhelming feeling of being watched. As more people came forward, a pattern emerged. The figures would often appear near places the children used to play before they vanished. The old tire swing near the creek, the path behind the elementary school, the rusting merry-go-round at the forgotten playground. It was as if they were still tethered to their former lives, drawn back to familiar places, yet no longer belonging to them. the town's denial started to fracture. People began to question whether the forest was simply hiding them, or if it had turned them into something else: specters, servants, or worse, extensions of whatever malevolent force lived within the woods. Some believed the children were being used, that the forest was keeping them in a limbo state to lure others in, that perhaps each new child taken became another watcher, another bait piece in the puzzle. One of the most chilling events occurred during a school field trip. A teacher snapped a group photo of the class near the tree line before heading into the Ridgeway Nature Preserve. When the photo was developed, there was an extra child in the frame. No one recognized her. She stood at the very edge, slightly apart from the group, her eyes wide and dark, her smile crooked. The school tried to dismiss it as a camera glitch, but parents weren't convinced. That same week, one of the boys in the photo vanished. He had been standing closest to her. The town eventually took down the signs marking forest trails. They stopped holding events near the woods, but the figures still came. Children in windows claimed they saw someone smiling at them from the trees. Some would talk about playing games with the quiet ones in their dreams. Parents began to dread when their child spoke of imaginary friends, especially those with names that sounded familiar, too familiar, like those of the lost dot. No one dared to speak to the figures. Those who tried said their voices wouldn't come out, like something in the air was choking the words back into their throats. Some described the feeling of something pressing against their chest when the figures were near. Others simply fainted. And still, the sightings increased. Whether these figures were truly the children who had gone missing, or something using their forms as a mask, no one knew for sure. But one thing was certain: the forest was never empty. It was watching, and the children of Ridgeway, in some form or another, were still there waiting in the shadows, silent and changed, for the next one to join them. The story of the Ridgeway disappearances took a more disturbing turn when people realized the children weren't just vanishing randomly, they were being lured. Over time, subtle clues began to surface, details overlooked in the panic of each missing person report. Children would be found with scribbled drawings days before they vanished, sometimes showing trees with faces, or stick-like figures with long arms standing in the woods. Some children even talked about a friend they met in their dreams. A friend who told them to come play in the forest because it was fun and nobody ever says no there. One boy named Liam had been acting strange weeks before he disappeared. His mother said he began waking up in the middle of the night, walking to the back door, and just standing there, staring into the trees. When she asked what he was doing, he'd say, listening. The night before he vanished, he drew something that looked like a twisted playground with no swings, just ropes tied to branches and dark shapes hanging from them. In the corner of the page, in a childish scrawl, he wrote, "Come join us, Liam." His mother didn't notice the message until after he was gone. These weren't just isolated cases. Parents of other missing children reported similar behavior, talking to unseen friends, hearing voices from the trees, and an increasing desire to wander into the forest alone. Some families installed security cameras after sensing something was wrong. One chilling clip showed a girl opening her window at 2 a.m. and whispering something into the night. Then, after a few minutes, she climbed out and walked barefoot into the woods. Her parents didn't hear a thing. The idea that something in the woods was calling to the children grew harder to dismiss. Whatever it was, it didn't use force, it used familiarity, curiosity, and something even more dangerous, shaped itself into something the children wanted: a friend, a game, a place without rules. And the most terrifying part, it seemed to know them. Their names, their fears, their dreams. It whispered in voices that sounded like lost siblings or trusted adults. It made the forest feel like home. After the 10th disappearance, in just 2 years, a local psychologist began researching the pattern and came across dozens of journal entries and therapy notes from children in the area who hadn't gone missing. The notes described identical visions: a girl in white standing at the edge of the trees, offering her hand, a boy with no mouth who laughed without sound, a rope swing that dangled over nothing but darkness. These images were shared by children who had never met or spoken to each other. The psychologist theorized that something was embedding itself in the minds of the children through dreams. He called it collective intrusion, a phenomenon where multiple people, especially young minds, begin to share the same hallucination or mental presence. But what disturbed him most wasn't the shared visions, it was how specific they were. Every child described the same clearing, the same tree, the same voice asking the same question: "Do you want to come play forever?" One family tried, moving away after their sons started drawing those strange forest pictures. They left Ridgeway and drove 4 hours south to stay with relatives. For a week, everything seemed fine. But on the 7th night, the son vanished from a locked room with no open doors or windows. His drawings were still in his bag. The last one showed a long stretch of forest with a small figure standing at the end of a path. The caption written under it simply read, "He found me anyway." Whatever was in the forest, it didn't just live in the trees, it lived in the minds of the children. It planted seeds, whispers, visions, temptations, and waited for them to come willingly. Some people speculated it wasn't a spirit or a ghost, but a force, something ancient, something woven into the soil of the Ridgeway woods, something that didn't take what it wanted, it invited it. A group of teenagers once tried to investigate the forest on Halloween, hoping to film something and go viral. Only 2 came back. They were found in their car, screaming incoherently, clawing at the windows. Both were eventually hospitalized. One of them, when he finally spoke again, only said one thing: "We heard them laughing, but it wasn't happy." He never spoke about it again. Now, when a child in Ridgeway starts having strange dreams, the parents don't take chances. They install locks, hide keys, and avoid bedtime stories. Because they know if the dreams start, it means the forest has noticed them. And if the forest calls to them, there's little anyone can do to stop them from going. It doesn't matter if it's day or night. Once the voice gets inside, once it convinces the child that there's something waiting for them just beyond the trees, something fun, something magical, it's already too late. The path has been chosen. And when they leave, they walk willingly into the woods, never to return, at least, not as themselves. Local authorities initially believed that the Ridgeway forest disappearances were a matter of children getting lost in dense, unmarked terrain. Search parties combed the woods for days after each report, sometimes with helicopters, dogs, and heat sensors. But what unsettled even the most seasoned officers was how they never found so much as a shoe print or scrap of clothing. It was as if the forest swallowed the children whole, erasing any sign they had ever entered it. One search team even reported walking in circles without realizing it, despite using GPS. They marked trees with tape, only to find the same marks in different locations minutes later. It didn't add up. Then came the more chilling discoveries. A retired ranger named Ellis, who had worked in Ridgeway for decades, shared something he had never told anyone. Long before the disappearances, he had found a small pile of teeth buried under a circle of stones deep in the woods. They were too small to belong to an adult. He marked the location and brought one of the teeth to his supervisor. But by the time they returned to the site, the stone circle was gone. In its place was a tree with a symbol carved into Etan, eye with 3 slashes through it. Ellis left the job shortly after and refused to speak publicly about it, until more children started vanishing. The police continued to treat the cases as missing person incidents, but the townspeople grew frustrated. Posters were stapled to every light pole, but they always faded and peeled, curling like dead leaves within days. Candlelight vigils were held, but every time, the wind would suddenly blow out the flames just before the names were read. Eventually, people began to whisper that the forest didn't like being searched, didn't like names being remembered. It wanted quiet. It wanted forgetting. A sheriff's deputy named Ray Carter once led a team of volunteers into a particularly remote section of the forest where the latest missing boy, Toby, was believed to have gone. They followed faint trails, broken branches, anything that might offer a clue. 3 hours in, they came upon a clearing none of them remembered seeing on any map. In the middle stood a crooked wooden structure, too small to be a house, too large to be a shed. It looked handmade, covered in strange markings and rope-like vines. As they approached, the air grew colder, and every compass needle spun wildly. One volunteer claimed to hear laughter, though no one else did. Inside the shack, they found nothing but piles of leaves and a cracked, empty birdcage. But under the floorboards, they discovered something far worse. Dozens of small carvings, like children's names, scratched into the wood. Some matched names of missing kids, others did not. Carter ordered everyone out and radioed for backup, but by the time they returned with reinforcements, the shack was gone. Not destroyed, gone. In its place stood a thick patch of trees, undisturbed, as if no human hand had ever touched them. From that point forward, the police began to scale back public searches, citing dangerous terrain and limited resources. But everyone in town knew the truth. They were scared, and they had every reason to be. One officer, who had been on nearly every case, left town suddenly with his family and refused to give interviews. Before leaving, he told a local shopkeeper something strange. They don't just vanish, they trade places. The phrase confused everyone at first, but theories began to form. Some believed the forest was a kind of gate, and the children weren't just gone, they were taken in exchange for something else. After every disappearance, people began reporting strange sightings. Animals behaving unnaturally, shadows flickering through closed windows, children's laughter echoing at midnight with no source. Some even said they saw the missing kids at the edge of the woods only, older, taller, different. They would just stand and stare before slipping away into the trees again. No one could explain how the forest could hide so much, or why the authorities refused to acknowledge the obvious. But the disappearances kept happening. The youngest victim was 4. The oldest was 12. No patterns, no consistent locations, and never a single trace left behind. It didn't matter how many cameras were installed or how tightly doors were locked. When the forest wanted someone, it found a way. Local journalists tried to investigate, but were met with resistance. A reporter named Jenna Hall went missing after publishing a blog post claiming she had cracked a pattern in the disappearances. Her laptop was found abandoned in her car on the edge of the woods. The article she posted was mysteriously wiped from the internet hours after it went up. All that remained was a screenshot where she circled several overlapping dates and wrote, "They go missing on the same nights the forest hums." The humming had long been part of Ridgeway folklore. people said the trees made a low, vibrating sound. On certain nights, especially before a thunderstorm or during the full moon, no one could record it, no device could pick it up, but those who heard it described the same sensation, a gentle pull, like being called by name in a voice they hadn't heard since childhood. So the forest remained untouched, its secrets buried under moss and silence, and the authorities, once determined to solve the mystery, had grown eerily quiet, as if they'd realized the only way to keep the town safe was to stop looking altogether. Even after years of unanswered questions and growing tension in Ridgeway, the townspeople started to notice one deeply unsettling trend. The families of the missing children never stayed for long. In the weeks following each disappearance, grief would settle over their homes like a thick fog. But what came after was even more disturbing. The families didn't just mourn, they changed. Slowly, their behavior grew erratic. Some stopped answering their phones. Others were seen wandering the town at odd hours, looking dazed or talking to no one. Their eyes looked hollow, as though they weren't entirely present anymore. One mother, Clara Jensen, began keeping every door and window in her house wide open, even during rainstorms. When questioned, she said, "He needs a way to come back in." Another parent, Richard Hale, dug a pit in his backyard and filled it with old toys and blankets, whispering that it was a place for him to land if he falls from the sky. These weren't the actions of people just suffering from grief. They seemed to be preparing for something. Or perhaps they knew something no one else did. In a particularly strange case, the Marshalls, whose daughter Lily had gone missing, vanished themselves. Their house remained locked from the inside. No sign of struggle, no farewell note, no luggage. Missing. Everything looked untouched except for one detail. In the middle of the living room was a circle of salt, and in the center sat Lily's favorite doll, perfectly upright with its eyes gouged out. No one could explain it, and police claimed there was no evidence of foul play, though no one in town believed that. It felt like a message or a warning. Rumors spread quickly, especially among the older generations who had lived in Ridgeway all their lives. They remembered odd things from decades earlier, similar vanishings never recorded in official reports. A schoolteacher named Mrs. Edith Blanchard confessed in church one Sunday that a girl named Abigail had gone missing from her class in 1969, but the school was told to remove all records of her attendance. They said her family moved, she whispered, trembling, but we all knew that wasn't true. She walked into those woods on a dare. We saw her. She never walked out. As more families disappeared or fled town entirely, Ridgeway began to change. Houses stood empty. Businesses closed early, especially on overcast days. Children were kept indoors, and parents refused to speak to outsiders. The community became closed off, protective, almost secretive. Outsiders noticed the tension, the way everyone looked over their shoulders or flinched at the sound of snapping twigs. It was like the entire town lived in anticipation of something returning, something none of them could explain. But the most haunting discovery came from a teenage boy named Caleb, who had been secretly investigating the disappearances. On his own, his sister had vanished 3 years prior, and his family fell apart in the aftermath. He believed the town was hiding something, maybe even involved in it. He started mapping out locations, interviewing locals, and keeping a diary. One day, he claimed to have found a hidden entrance in the forested tunnel beneath a pile of rocks with handprints burned into the stone. He never came back. His notebook was found weeks later, wedged between two trees at the edge of town. The last entry read, "They don't want to leave. They belong to it now. And it's hungry again." That sentence alone sent a fresh wave of panic through Ridgeway. Parents pulled their children out of school. A town meeting was held behind closed doors. Not a single word of it made it to the press. Then, just when things seemed to settle, the sightings began. Children reported seeing people in their yards at night, tall, pale figures with elongated faces and wide, unblinking eyes. Some claimed to recognize their missing siblings, except they looked older and wrong, like mannequins dressed in memories. One boy swore he saw his brother standing in the street at 2 a.m., just staring, then turning and walking back into the woods without a sound. The town's fear became suffocating, but they had long stopped calling for help. The police, the media, the outsiders, they all failed. And so, Ridgeway folded in on itself, leaving the world outside to forget. Some say the forest demanded silence in return for peace. Others say the people gave up hope. Either way, the story was buried, but the woods still stand, and sometimes hikers still go missing, usually children. Every few years, the cycle begins again. A name is whispered, a poster goes up, a vigil is held, and then nothing. The people of Ridgeway have learned to live with the silence, but the truth hangs over them like a shadow. The forest is not just a place, it is a force. And once it takes someone, it doesn't give them back. Because Ridgeway doesn't forget its children, it just keeps them.